Hello, hello, hello. And today I will be talking to you about a very specific node, or rather, I will be explaining a very specific node that we use in every procedural material. So I think it's time I explain something about it, and that is the texture coordinate node. You can see you have a variety of possibilities here to plug into your vector, and oftentimes we only use object, and that has a very specific reason. I will show you that reason in this beautiful tutorial, or rather explanation video, and I will explain when to use these different versions. First of all, let's start with the easiest one, which is generated. What generate basically does is it projects based upon the vertex position of the mesh. Meaning if you, oopsala, meaning if you go into this mesh and you deform it, you you can see the texture changes accordingly. Like if I move this up and down, texture changes accordingly. But if I, for example, have a shape key or something, it just stretches the texture. This, of course, works in this way, but for example, if you have a rigged mesh, and you can see like this is already distorted because it uses the vertex thing, and we have a lot of vertices here, and these vertices are distorted. You can see the global scale is applied. We can probably reset vectors, that probably helps, but not a lot. But we can see here now, if we would go into pose mode, and now pose our mesh, we can see that the texture would stay mostly the same, which is good. That is what we want, but it's very distorted at some points, and you can understand, like, if you would have a more complex mesh, that this will definitely not work. Reason why we usually don't use generated and we use object. The next option that we have for our thing that we can plug in is normal. That basically just uses the normal of the face and basically just has like a 1 or 0 input, which doesn't really help us much, like you can see. It doesn't really do much for our procedural detectors, so we usually never use that. UV, probably the option that is the most flexible and that works the easiest and almost every time, but also requires the most of setup. You would need to unwrap your object for this to look good. On the other side, what you can do is you basically have all of the flexible things that you would have with a UV unwrap. You can use shape keys without issues. Of course, it would stretch the UVs, but that's normal. And you can also completely have rigging and no distortion in the texture, and you of course don't have a distorted texture to begin with because it doesn't use vertex information, it uses the UV information. Very helpful for procedural textures on characters. Of course, you would need to unwrap that, but given the fact that your character probably needs a clean topology to work to begin with, a UV map isn't that much work. Object, the thing that we use the most. What can you do with this? Basically, it uses the object as a source for your coordination. Basically, if you use this in normal space, that's fine. You can move this, you can do stuff with it because it uses the local coordinate space and not the global one. But if you now go in here and you start changing the object, you can see the texture doesn't move on it. It just expands basically. And you can see that pretty clearly, right? Wait, oops, go up. It just expands, which is good. If you want to have like procedural standard or something, basically if you edit the mesh, you just add to the texture and not distort it, which is for most objects what we want when we do something. Or if we bevel this, you still have like a coherent texture space, which is in most cases what we want to achieve. Reason why we use object the most. Of course, what this does when we have a rigged mesh, you will see. Well, because it uses a texture space that basically just projects something onto it, if this mesh now moves through local space or through rigged space, you can see that, well, the texture moves with it. Very unfortunate if you have a rigged character that now has a texture on it that now moves when the character moves. Reason why you shouldn't use object when you have a rigged object in any way, shape, or form, because you will have your procedural texture on it move as well, which is not what you want, obviously. Or you do want it, and then it's intentional. Then we have the camera. The camera basically projects our camera view onto this. This is very helpful when you, for example, have objects where you use image projection. For example, you have a house and you want to project an image texture onto it, but it only really needs to match the camera to look fine. For example, you are pulling references from a photo, and that photo is 2D, and you want to project a 2D photo onto a 3D house. You could use the camera here, and then you basically would project your image texture onto that. Obviously, that doesn't work because I don't have an image here, but you get what I'm saying. Very helpful in some instances, usually not used though. Window is very similar to this. It just doesn't use the camera necessarily. It uses the general 3D window, which I have never seen anybody have any use for this. Maybe somebody has, let me know in the comments, but I have never found any use for this. Then we have the reflection. And the reflection basically uses, well, the reflection of an object. Again, I have also really not seen anybody use this before ever, so I can't really comment much on the uses or of the practical uses to this. My best guess would be that if you use an environment texture, this could be helpful, but really my knowledge is very limited when it comes to it. So the things that you will most likely will be using are generated, UV, and object, and maybe camera. You can forget about the rest of them, to be honest. You don't need normal in most cases. You don't need window, and you don't need reflection in any case, shape, or form. Well, I hope I could teach you something. I hope I could explain something to you and help you with your procedural textures, or maybe troubleshoot something for you. And I hope to see you next time. Bye bye.